Scripts. We are so excited to be doing another Disney movie today. It's Moana. Yay!
Hooray!
So beautiful. It was very stunning to watch this movie as everything is really gray and cold and brown up here in the
In
Northeast.
Connecticut,
So it was
yeah.
just such beautiful colors and made me feel warm, and I just loved it.
Me too. And, was this your first time seeing Moana?
This was, yep. So
Mhm.
Moana, I think, was on I listening to it though, I heard some, like, lines that I've heard people use. Now I can't think of them, but I was like, "Oh, that's from Moana." I know it's
Yeah.
big, but I really
Yes.
only have seen Frozen being, like, a non-parent, at this
Yeah.
point in my life. So
Yeah.
I liked it. It was very, very
Yeah.
sweet.
I love this movie. I love, the songs. I think Auli'i Cravalho, who was just Janice, not Ian anymore, I forget her last name, Emike, I think, from Mean Girls, the
N
musical, she was Janice.
No way.
Yeah,
Oh my
that's who
gosh, I never
voiced
made that
Moana.
connection. I
Yeah.
love that.
I know. So she was the voice of Moana when she was only 16 years old. This movie came out back Thanksgiving weekend of 2016. And the second Moana is going to be coming out, I believe, next year. And she's going to reprise the role. So is The
Aw.
Rock, who plays Maui. Um, and I just think it's really great that they had the main actor and actress who do have Polynesian heritage. And I
Yes.
just think like one thing that I found really interesting rewatching it, of course, as a parent, I have seen this several times. And I do have to say at Epcot, they have a whole new amazing, amazing, amazing. I will put some videos and stuff up on our TikTok and Instagram this week because it was so moving. They have really beautiful Moana exhibit now where they've recreated
Mm.
the Tafiti, the green version, and you learn all about the environment and the water life cycle and the earth. And it's like it was so cool to see when I went to Disney a couple months back with my kids. It was really cool for them to learn about, and I felt like it was a really awesome way
Mhm.
to like educate while being entertaining, which is
Sure.
like kind of what we're hoping to do here in Analyze Scripts. And I think like Disney gets it so right in some ways. But I also, in doing some preparation for recording this episode, found that there were a lot of criticisms of this movie. And did you pick up on any of that just watching it for the first time?
I was curious if there was. I mean, am absolutely no expert in
Hmm.
any cultures. So I was, wondering though, because it's appeared to be so specifically, unique to, I don't know, like a Polynesian background,
Hmm.
that I was wondering if there were parts that they didn't get right. I did
Hmm.
like, which I'll always throw in here before we get to that. I felt like I liked her body, and that maybe sounds
Yes.
weird to say,
No, but
but
based on like, all the Disney princesses we
yeah.
had growing up.
Yeah, I just
Hmm.
felt like it was a really great depiction of, like, a young girl, and
Hmm.
I just, I appreciate it. I'm sure there we could always be better, we could always do more, but I was happy that it wasn't kind of the stereotypical, more, like, really, 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 really thin,
Cinderella.
Cinderella with, like, curves.
Even in Frozen, they
Yeah.
still are very,
Yep.
very thin. I agree, and I liked how Moana several times throughout the movie says, "I'm not a princess. I'm the
Mhm.
daughter of the chief, and I'm gonna
Yep.
be the chief." I
Yep.
really liked that. Um, so I found this really interesting article, which we'll link to in our show notes, by a Smithsonian scholar of Pacific Island sea voyaging, named Doug Herman, who I thought wrote a really excellent article, just sort of outlining what he thought they got right and some things they got wrong. So this is someone who has studied sea
Mhm.
voyaging, which is basically what Maui teaches Moana how to do. And some of the stuff they got right, like the voyaging canoe that they used, is accurate to the Polynesian culture. There is what they call the long pause, which was a gap of like thousand, like 2,000 years, I think, between when Western Polynesia was colonized and then when other areas were colonized. Um, Before like those people started voyaging on the ships again, and no one really understands why. We kind of see that depicted here,
Right.
in the father and everyone like telling Moana like we don't venture outside the reef and things
Mhm.
like that. And we see some of the Polynesian like mysticism and
Yep.
spirituality and sort of like those cultural beliefs being depicted, which I thought was really interesting. Like I guess um, Maui is a demigod. in this culture. And again, I'm not an expert either. I'm really sort of gauging this based on this, what I thought was an excellent article by a scholar. Um, Moana is the word for ocean. So that's really interesting. Tafiti is an island deity. I guess there was a female counterpart to Maui, which they left out of the movie, which some people criticized. And then there were criticisms about Maui, about that character being very stereotypical, even of like body size, um of the sort of like how he's kind of depicted as kind of like silly and dumb. And I think some native Polynesians took a lot of issue with that, saying like that's how everyone sees us, and like we don't appreciate that you're furthering the narrative. Kind of reminded me of like what we talked about in The Blind Side.
Yeah.
So I just think these things are really interesting, as we think about like how did these movies get made, who's making the movie, how much research
Mhm.
do they do. I did see that, I believe the director or producer, I can't remember their names off the top of my head, but I believe they were two white men, and they did um, allegedly talk to people from these different cultures to get some information. And I bet they were able to expense those business trips to
Yeah.
Polynesia, which I'm
To
really
Bora
jealous
Bora.
of.
Mhm.
So jealous. So I think they tried, and I think they got a lot right, but then some stuff they got wrong.
Mhm.
And so I'm curious to see how the second version that's coming out in the near future sort of keeps building on what they have.
Yeah. I feel like too with the Disney movies, I think they've tried, I think, hard to like promote a stronger female lead. And I think
Hmm.
it seems like at least in with Moana, it's like if there's a strong female lead in the typical ingredients for a Disney movie, there also has to be like
A
a
male.
silly, a dumb, a less helpful, a
Mm-hmm.
stumbling, and, like, there was Hey Hey the Chicken, but I think also, like, maybe that's why, like, Maui was depicted in that way because like, they needed to boost up Moana. I mean, yeah, like, of course, then, like, they
Why do
don't
they have to do
appreciate
that?
exactly, like,
Hmm.
why can't there be, like, everybody's pretty smart and then somebody's just the leader? Like, I don't know, I'm just
Hmm.
hypothesizing, but, to me, it seemed like they had to put all these, like, people around Moana, like the chicken
Hmm. Hmm.
and Maui to kind of, like, boost her up to make it so clear that she's this, like, strong protagonist.
Hmm. Right. And I think that begs the question of why. Like,
Yeah.
why can't she just be on her own? And
Mhm.
would she be even more powerful if her male counterpart wasn't like that? If they
Mhm.
were also smart, but she was smarter, or whatever.
Right.
And I think again, this also kind of reminds me of some of the dialogue around the Barbie movie, that like, why is it a huge corporation helmed by rich white men that are pushing out this cultural narrative?
Mhm.
Like, why are they the ones who are benefiting?
Right.
Both like, financially, of course, but also like in terms of accolades and things like that. Why couldn't it have been sort of the native Polynesians with the power? It just
Mhm.
raises interesting
It's like their
questions across
story
the
to
board.
tell. Yeah.
Right. And it just and again, I think especially with something like this in the history of like colonization and all of that, it's just really interesting how art and media can be
Mm.
like how art imitates life.
Yeah. Even
So
when
it's
they're, like,
interesting.
trying not to.
Right,
It's like
right.
it's in society,
The
so it's, like,
DNA,
in
yeah.
us, and
Right.
it comes out.
Right, right,
Mhm.
exactly. And it's like, okay, so is it cultural appropriation, or
Mhm.
is it trying to tell a story of a different culture, right? Like it begs a lot of interesting questions.
Also, I'd say and I know that they're very, 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 different from, like, a traditional tattoo that someone in
Mm,
the state would
mhm.
get, but I liked how they showed in a Disney movie, like, art on bodies. I think that's
Yes,
something I have not seen to my knowledge.
in
You
a Disney
probably would
movie,
know
yeah.
more in a Disney movie, and I really, really loved that it was, like, an important we saw them getting the, like, the guy on the getting the ink on
Mhm.
his back, he's like, "Ah,"
Yes,
screaming the first time. I love that it's, like, meaningful. I like how
yes.
Maui described it, like, "Oh, I get these when, there's special" I'm not using his wonderful language, but, like, "I get these for
Mhm.
special occasions," like, and it is such a part of
Right,
their life and
their
story, and then the
culture.
grandma with her getting that, what was the sea creature, what's it called, that she
Like
turned
the
into?
stingray or
Yeah, she
something?
got that on her
The
back
ray?
hoping that she would,
Mhm.
turn into one in the afterlife, and it was just like I thought it was a beautiful part.
And I in my reading again, I did see like a lot of people did appreciate that.
Mm,
And again, I think for a Disney movie to show like tattoos, that's one thing, but then
right.
also just the cultural meaning behind it is really nice. And I did really like that part too.
Mhm, yeah. So,
So
what do you think of this story? You said that, it's one of your faves, right?
I do really like I love the music. It's interesting to revisit it now that further movies like Encanto have come out, which, the newer Little Mermaid, all of which, Lin-Manuel Miranda
Mhm.
has been a part of. And I just love his musical style. And I
Yes.
just love some of the music here. Auli'i Cravalho just has an amazing voice. Like I love listening to these songs in the car with my kids, especially my daughter, and I am Moana, it's
Mhm.
just like so powerful. Um, what I love about this movie is I just feel like Moana herself is such a great depiction of a secure attachment. And hasn't it been interesting that that's been so hard to find?
Yes.
Like, if you think about
Yes.
all the episodes we've done so far and all the protagonists in Disney movies, it's very rare for them to have a
Oh,
secure
yeah.
attachment.
It's always insecure, it's always anxious. There always seems to be, like, a trauma that we see,
Yes.
and, like, for once,
Yes.
we, didn't. And, we saw
Yes.
sad things happening, her grandma being sick and then, of course, ending up passing away and, this journey that she's on and, the
Mhm.
black invading lines of the island, like, that's all sad and troubling and hard, but it wasn't, like, this trauma that we're, having an arc from. It's like, "No, I'm just secure. Like, I'm ready. I'm
Mhm.
prepared.
Mhm.
I'm powerful. I'm me."
Mhm. And I think she has both parents.
Yep.
Which is, unusual for a Disney movie.
Mhm.
I'm also gonna link to another article in our show notes about, like, Walt Disney's trauma history, because it's
Ooh.
actually quite extensive, and I think that might give us some insight into why there are such
Wow, I didn't know
intense
that.
dark themes like in these films. Um, so I think, just I'll link to this article, but it says that he did grow up where in a world where corporal punishment was accepted as a form of parental discipline. So he has said, or he did, he has since passed away, that he and his brother both suffered at the hands of their remote and taciturn father, Elias, whose favorite tool of enforcement was a switch. And that, his dad used that to punish the kids for, transgressions. And he kind of spoke out later in his life, sort of wondering, like, how could someone so cruel and cold be his father? And why didn't his mom step in? Um,
Wow.
yeah, right. Like, I think, what do you think
It's
of
big to
that?
share. I'm shocked that someone of his age, just in, like, with at the times, like, would share that. I'm happy he did. I
Hmm.
feel like that could gives, like, good insight of just, like, the people that we are. I feel like typically that generation, does
Hmm.
not talk about that stuff. So for him to
Right.
come out and say pretty vulnerable things, I'm interested. I didn't know
Yeah.
that. Hmm.
And also, like, I wonder how old he was when he was finally able to talk about it. Like, was he talking about it in the early movies, like Snow White, Dumbo,
Mm.
things like that? And was that his way of coping with the trauma?
Mm.
Sadly, there's more trauma beyond just that. His parents died in a carbon monoxide leak, and I believe he blamed himself for that. Um, I think, he'd bought them a new home and,
Mm.
I can't remember now off the top of my head if both of his parents died or if just his mother died. I know his mother died, and that it was a carbon monoxide leak in the new home he bought them. So I think he felt
Mm.
responsible, perhaps in a way that was more of a trauma reaction
Right.
than actual responsibility. But I think it gives a lot of
Oh,
insight
yeah.
into these films, right?
Yes, I mean, thinking of the heartbreaking ones, right? Like, even,
Like
like,
Lion
Lion
King.
King, Bambi, Dumbo, like, I mean, I think I don't really like that Disney era,
Mhm.
just because I think it's
Mhm.
dark. I mean, I know that there's always usually, like, a
Mhm,
happy ending, but, like, some of it is really dark, and I
mhm,
have noticed a change with specifically some of the movies that we've covered because typically I'm not watching Disney movies like Encanto, like Frozen, like,
mhm.
Frozen,
Mhm.
like, a little dark, but Moana. Like, it's really just about adventure and trying
It's a different
something.
format.
It
Yeah.
is, and it feels so much lighter to me, and it's, like, the
Yeah.
same message that, like, you can work hard and succeed and, like, you know, when you have support and good people around you matters and connection matters, like,
Mhm.
I don't think we need to go into, like, death and trauma to get there
All the
for
time.
kids.
Yeah. And I felt like, the newer Disney movies that focus on female protagonists, they're not the stereotypical princess.
Right.
The goal isn't to fall in love and get married. Like if that happens, great, but that's not the goal. The goal, right? Like with Frozen, with Encanto, now we see with Moana, it's a different goal. And
Mhm.
I just love Moana because I feel like she is such a good depiction of a secure attachment, right? Like we see her grandmother. We see her
Yep.
grandmother's spirit come to her in a moment of self-doubt and when she's questioning herself, and her grandmother actually says to her, "It's okay if you wanna go home now." Oh,
Oh.
like, "It's okay, make your decision," but her grandmother also says to her, like, on her deathbed before she goes on her voyage, "There's nowhere you could go where I won't be," and I'm, like, filing that away to tell my own kids, you know? I just think it's so beautiful, and it's true, she comes to her in her time of need, and I think that's just so human. It made me
Mhm.
think of my grandma, and, like,
Yeah.
how we think about those people who we love or even, like, God or, a higher power or things like that when we're feeling like we're really struggling or we need some help
Mhm.
and how people with a secure attachment can do that because
Right.
they've been able to internalize those helpful figures, right? And we,
And those messages that, like, I'm not
yeah.
going anywhere. Even if,
Mhm.
and things, do happen in life, we do lose people, but it's all about that base, and, like, as a child, Moana had this huge support network, right? Her 2
Right.
parents who seem very appropriate, dad is, anxious about the water, but it seems like that's a pretty cultural norm, and it's for
Mhm.
safety, and in
Mhm.
other ways, he really guides her and gives her the spirit of, like, she can do, he's preparing her to be chief, so there's no, like,
But
belittling
there's not like the
anything that
pressure
can
like Elsa felt,
right, there is
you
none, and
know?
to say that with the grandma saying, "You can go home," like, that's huge.
Huge.
This isn't riding
Huge.
on you, it's not your alone battle to fix, like,
Right.
maybe
Right.
she
Like
would go back and they would help her, but, like,
right.
it was really nice.
It's really beautiful, right? Especially when you compare it to like Elsa, or I'm
Mhm.
thinking Louisa from Encanto, right? Or like I'm even thinking about like college students I've evaluated in the past who are really struggling and we're having the hard conversation with their parents about whether they should take a leave of absence or not, and how the parents who say like I don't care what it costs, like if you want to come home, you can come home, how that goes such a long way to
Mhm.
just have a safe, secure, stable home to come home to, and how even though Moana knew her dad might disapprove, she didn't feel like she'd lose him
Right.
or be rejected, and in fact, she didn't. Like, they welcomed her back with open
Mhm.
arms. They didn't send everyone after her to
Right.
bring her home. It was just such a beautiful depiction of a secure attachment. So that's, like, the huge reason why I love this movie and will keep watching it with my daughter
Mhm.
forever. And then just the discrepancy between Moana and then Maui,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Like, what did you think of Maui?
So Maui, the first, thing I thought about when we met him was, I was waiting for like another character. And again, like I had not seen it at all. So I was like, who's going to join her? Who's it going to be on this journey? Because it's probably not just Hey Hey, but Hey Hey was one of my favorite characters.
I love how they always have a sidekick,
I
and I love that
know.
Maui was like, "If you're a girl and you have a animal sidekick, you're a princess." Like
Literally. And how Hey Hey just like, how so appropriately Moana was getting so exasperated by Hey Hey, like walking into the water. She's like, putting you're gonna stay in this like box, like you can't keep walking to the water, you're gonna drown, like I'm tired of saving you, like get it together, Hey Hey, get it together.
Mhm.
So anyway, when she finally kind of crashes on this island, and we meet Maui, the first thought was like, ooh, he's been alone in isolation for like, right, like 1,000, 2,000 years.
Mhm. I think like
Like,
2,000 years, like
what does
that
that
long
do that to a
pause.
person? Obviously he's a god, so like he
Or a
doesn't
demigod, which means
die
he's
right
like part
away.
human, part god. Yeah.
Right. And so I was just like, is he okay? Like, does he think that she's a hallucination? Like, is this, what we know what isolation does to people? It's typically horrible.
Yes.
Um, So I was just curious if he was gonna have, like, any kind of response,
Like, what was that, like, Tom Hanks movie, Castaway,
Mhm.
with, like, Wilson, you know?
Right, right, developing attachment to a
Yeah,
volleyball. I mean, like,
right.
we and you saw all of the markings on all of the rocks, like, I think it was days,
Just
and
trying to keep track like, I wonder if they did that in the Love Is Blind pods to keep track of, like, how long they've been in the pods. Sidebar. Um, yeah, and I thought it was interesting too that it becomes really like, first when we see Maui, he's just, like, big, gregarious, confident, self-important, entitled, kinda
thinks he's a
goofy.
hero, yep.
Yeah, kinda guy, right? And then we learn he's, like, was super selfish to take the heart of Tafiti, and it just basically, like, really negatively affected their whole like, the
Yes.
world, the environment, like, their whole world. Um, but then it's like, as he finally opens up to Moana, and again, here again, we see the wounded adult. Well, who knows how old Maui is, I guess, if he's a demigod. He looks more adult than Moana. Wounded adult can, like, open up and attach to a child.
Mm,
You know, we kinda keep seeing that theme as well in different films, where he says, "I had human parents. They took one look at me and didn't want me, so
mm.
they threw me in the ocean." Like, ouch. Talk about an attachment
Right,
wound,
right.
and then the gods find him and kind of, like, accept him, and I think, like, I feel like Maui's a good depiction of narcissistic traits in a way to me that feels more connected to trauma
Yes.
than like a narcissistic personality disorder, right? Like we
No,
see
yeah.
like the rejection and then acceptance and then how Maui feels like he has to do and succeed and achieve and give in order to keep getting accepted and
It's like how he
attention.
copes with it so much
Yes.
clearer than, like,
Right.
this is my core self, where it's, like,
Right.
it's not a function. I feel like his serves a very specific function to keep him connected to the gods, and, like, we
Right.
even see that falter when his hook, right, starts not working.
Yes.
It's like he's losing that identity, and that's
Right.
obviously, so hard for him when he finally just got it back, and he's probably so excited to be accepted and be
Mhm.
his self again, and I liked that arc of, like, how he learns kind of to be secure quickly with himself, without the hook, and that, like,
Mhm.
he's good anyway, and that's when he,
Good enough
he
just as
can
he
access
is.
it. Exactly.
Right. Right. I think, like, that is just a really, like, nice depiction
Mhm.
of that sort of journey for him, and even, like, when he leaves Moana, when he's so upset about the hook and leaves her, and he, like, does to her what had been done to him. I think, like, that can happen
Right.
in people with these sort of early attachment wounds when you start to get close to someone, it doesn't feel safe. Like, Moana the whole time is feeling safe, and, like, we can get mad at each other, and we'll come back, and it'll be okay. Maui's not feeling like that. Like, his sense of self, I think, in that moment was really rocked, and he's like, "Okay, I can't trust you anymore. I
Mhm.
gotta go. I gotta get
Right.
out of here because if I lose this hook, my one attachment to the gods, I'm, like, gonna disintegrate."
Mhm.
Like, who
Yeah.
am I then? And
I
it's
think
only when
leaving
mhm,
is a really good depiction of, like, what happens. Like, people do leave when they feel like a part of them is going to be hurt, and I think it's
right.
so much connected to attachment, and especially an attachment wound with, like, we see in therapy all the time, we either see somebody who leaves a lot, or we see the person who was just with someone who suddenly kind of left, and it's like, "Why?"
Mhm,
And it's often if the reaction to given context to a normal situation is bigger, too big or too small. It's like, that's what makes always me question, like, okay, like, why are we having this reaction? What's happening? What there's something more to the story than that. And for Maui, it
mhm,
is his childhood wounds that come up,
mhm,
in
mhm,
often in times of stress, right? It's like sometimes
mhm.
we're pretty regulated when things are going well, but then all of a sudden when something is hard, like that's when our core stuff comes out. And sometimes it's not good.
100%. Right,
Mhm.
100%. It's like everyone, whether you struggle with anxiety or you're, like, the most mentally well person in the world, like, we all have our limit of things we can cope with, and if you chip it away enough, like, you get dysregulated,
Mhm.
you
Yeah.
know? That's just how it works.
Mhm.
So I really liked that, being able to so clearly compare and contrast like a
Yeah.
secure versus an insecure attachment style.
Yeah. It was beautiful. I loved like I said before, I loved the setting, and I loved when Taka became Tafiti. So I know we're gonna talk a
Mhm.
little bit about that in
Yes.
terms of, like, therapy, but even thinking of, like, just the scenery and the setting from going from, like, really dark
Mhm.
and dangerous and scary to really
Yes,
beautiful like,
and lush and
life-giving.
green.
Yep.
Yes,
Yeah.
and I loved that sorta, like, twist at the end. I didn't see that coming.
Mhm.
First of all, also, if I had to be a god, I would wanna be Tafiti because it looks like she just lays down and naps. Like, she just lays down.
Yep.
I'm like, "Man, that sounds great," you know? But I think basically, I loved that too, that it turns out they were both her, just different
Mhm.
parts of her, and that Moana, almost like with her secure attachment, helped Tafiti like reintegrate herself,
Mhm.
right? It's almost like Maui like took the heart of her and her sense of self like split in two. And now Moana has like brought it back to her and helped her reintegrate.
Yeah, and people continued to so it's like what I'm thinking of in terms of, like, clients, it's like when someone has a large wound. So I think, like,
Mhm.
getting her heart taken was a large wound, and
Yeah.
then we react in a way, usually to, like, save ourselves, which typically
Mhm.
is not we usually use, like, maladaptive behaviors, and
Right.
then that backfires again because then people are even more unlikely to talk to us or we push people away, so things get worse, and it's like so
Right.
she's now this, like, mega scary creature, and then she continues to get hurt, right? The world fears
Mhm.
her, people
Mhm.
come and try to hurt her, we see Maui, like,
Mhm.
cutting off her arms, obviously they grow back,
Yeah.
but, like, she's
Yeah.
getting hurt over and over and over again, and that tip, like, makes things worse over and over and
Right.
over again.
But at the same time, keeps building up her armor to keep
Yes.
people away
Yep.
and keep them out. Like, there's the
Yep.
fire, there's the ash, there's the
Mhm.
threat of danger, of hurt, so it keeps people away, and, like, that's what people do to protect themselves,
Yes.
sometimes consciously, most of the time unconsciously,
Mhm.
right? That's when you, like, might self-sabotage
Yes.
or, just be avoidant.
Mhm. Yeah. Yep, and I think, Moana with her, again, secure attachment, like, also just, like, showing her the heart and giving something despite
Yeah,
being scared, I think that can be really powerful to right? Typically, it doesn't happen that fast, but people absolutely can learn that, like, there are safe people, and
right,
you can be secure and, like, trust your gut and learn the difference and be
right,
powerful even when
right.
you've been hurt by a lot of people.
Right, right, and I love that Moana, like I was gonna say gave her the heart without expecting anything in return, but I guess she did expect something in return, which was like, our land needs to, like, be prosperous again.
Mhm.
But I just loved how, like, Moana and Tafiti kept touching foreheads. It was, like, such, like, a simple but very intimate
Very Yep.
connection,
Yep.
that I just thought was, like, very sweet, and
It
it
was a
reminds
great
me.
visual.
Yeah, and it does remind me of what, like, parents do with their babies
Mhm.
and things like that, just this, like, intimate connection and how, Tafiti could finally tolerate it again. I think Moana would be a great therapist.
Yeah, that's true.
Maybe in, the sequel, maybe that's the whole plot.
She finds all these other, goddesses or demigods who need
Yeah,
some help with
some DBT, yeah,
their
some,
skills, but
reintegration.
I think in the moment, I would say, I think when Moana and, Te were, like, give when she was giving the heart back in that moment, I feel like it was not transactional. I think that
Right.
Moana was really, like, just feeling and I think maybe even that's why, like, Tahiti came out because it was, like, the
Mhm.
first time
It
that
felt
something
safe,
felt
yeah.
more pure. And then,
Mhm.
yes, like, she then, fixed things, but I just feel like Moana right, she set off on this journey thinking one thing, thinking that, like, Maui needed
Had
to
to do
do
it
something, and then she learned that actually this I can do it also, which I think was the main story,
all by
but, like
myself, yeah. I don't
but
need a man.
this is not just about me, it's about, like, helping,
Her,
Taka heal, and it felt
yeah.
really, like, nice in that
It
moment.
felt very genuine.
Mhm.
Yeah, I loved it. I think the only other thing I wanted to mention before we wrap up is I also just, like, loved the
Yes.
grandmother overall, like, you know how much I love grandparents in general, but I loved in this film, I thought it did nicely sort of touch on how it can be hard sometimes to distinguish, like, what's the difference between someone having what we call delusional beliefs, which are, the definition is something like, a fixed false belief that is not shared by other people in your culture versus beliefs that are culturally normal
Right.
in that culture, which to other cultures might seem odd or bizarre, but in that culture are not,
Mhm.
versus what do you do like this grandmother when part of what you're saying is accepted by your culture, but then other parts are not? Like, how
Right.
does that fall? I thought it was just
Mhm.
a really interesting sort of depiction of that. And maybe I'm only thinking that because that's the way my mind works. And that was interesting.
And we've covered that in other movies when we
Hmm.
talked about, like,
Like side
cultural
effects.
yep, cultural, impacts of just, like, people having beliefs that, in our very typical also where movies are made, like Western culture
Hmm.
that, don't seem right or that, will call the police on someone or will hospitalize someone who's having, saying they're seeing their dead uncle, and it's like in a lot of cultures and belief systems, like, that's real, and I think it can be
Hmm.
hard sometimes for people to distinguish. Right? Like, what is a
Hmm.
hallucination? What's a delusion? What's, like, a shared cultural belief and a part of their own
Right.
spiritual, journey. So I think
Right.
that's a good point to bring up.
And I think it's hard as a provider when you're evaluating this, when you're not familiar with the culture.
Mhm.
Um, and also like, what if like, what if someone's saying the house is haunted and it is? Like, I don't know if there's ghosts,
Right.
Like, I don't know.
I
I
think
don't
you'd
want to
have to
mess with that.
do which is our, job to do, but, like, if I was working with someone in another culture and they were talking to me about things, you're
You need to
responsible to do some extra, research.
legwork. Yeah. 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 100%.
Or,
100%.
find a provider that's a better fit. But I think,
Right.
it does yield just we need, providers from all backgrounds everywhere.
Yeah.
So if you're thinking
Right.
about the field, you should do
You
it.
should do it. Maybe not right now because Change
Oh, yeah,
Healthcare data breach is like so stressful,
because we're
but
not being paid, but that's okay.
great.
We will be.
So we really appreciate you supporting our show right now, especially now that we're on Acast and getting a little bit of ad revenue.
Mhm.
Anything else you want to bring up, Portia, before we sign off for today?
No, I don't think so. I think it's a great movie for adults. I'm gonna be the
Mhm.
voice, someone without children right now. I think it was beautiful. The setting, like, the
Yeah.
scenery was stunning. If you have the winter blues right now, some seasonal affective disorder, maybe watch
Mm.
some Moana or other,
Yeah.
beautiful setting movies or TV shows that make you feel more alive and warm,
Yeah.
but that's my
Yeah.
prescription.
And if you can, like, go to Epcot and see the new Moana exhibit because it's really beautiful. And I'm really excited to cover the second one when it comes
Yes, me
out.
too. That'll be great.
All right. Well, thank you again for listening. And please follow us at Analyze Scripts Podcast on Instagram and TikTok. You can watch this episode on YouTube, and we will catch you next Monday.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.